Ladies, this screencast is going to continue with our Chapter 9 notes, starting with new government. And we're going to introduce this topic with our very first president, George Washington. He is chosen as the first president. Remember, he's really the only choice for the job, so it's more of an appointment, honestly. But John Adams will serve as his vice president. He's pictured at the top center of the screen. And then working our way from top to bottom on the right side, you have Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton, and the Secretary of War Henry Knox. These men will together make his first cabinet and the first cabinet of the United States. So just three branches, or three departments, I should say, within the executive branch at the time that George Washington is president. So times have changed overall for sure. Okay, we're going to talk about political parties kind of starting to form early on based on the views of two of our different cabinet members, and that's Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury, and Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State. Hamilton and Jefferson have very different views of what America should look like with the Constitution in place. And their views kind of start to split the nation into two separate factions or groups, and these groups will eventually kind of form the two first political parties. So truly, our two-party system historically, traditionally, has gone back really to the origins of the U.S., even though there's nothing in the Constitution about political parties, and it was certainly not anything that Washington endorsed, but it does kind of happen naturally on its own. So we'll talk about those two groups now, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. So the Federalists kind of represent Hamilton's vision for America. Federalists favor a very strong federal government. They favor a friendship with England and the British, who are obviously their former adversaries, but now that they're independent, Hamilton wants to work cooperatively with England, especially from a trade perspective, a money-making perspective. Also kind of represented with the Federalists, the power base was really amongst merchants, the Northerners, property owners, kind of the higher income classes. Hamilton kind of foresees a mixed agricultural economy, but also an economy in which the nation is industrial and very focused on trade. So he kind of has a balance between industry and agriculture as how America makes its profits. So when you think, Federalists, you should think again, industry, trade, merchants, wealthy, the North, generally speaking, manufacturers. And Jefferson's vision for America is very polarizing, kind of like the opposite of Hamilton's in that, by these definitions. So while Hamilton favors a strong federal government, Jefferson's very focused on limiting the power of the federal government and kind of creating a smaller central government and reserving a bit of power within the states. Jefferson is very hostile to Great Britain. He favors the French. He had a relationship with the French kind of during the Revolution, and post-Revolution we'll also see him kind of favor the French politically. His power base is kind of focused among Southern planters. Jefferson foresees an agricultural nation. He doesn't really focus on industry. Of course, industry doesn't really benefit the South at all right now. It's all in the North. So he's more focused on that vision of, self-sufficient, small land-owning farmers and agriculture being the backbone of the economy. So when you think about Jefferson's Democratic Republicans, think planters, farmers, Western settlers, who are, the Southerners are the ones who are moving west to settle new land, and Southerners overall. Let me be clear that Washington does not approve of political parties, but they do form on their own anyway. The National Bank is going to be kind of a big example of tension and conflict within the cabinet and within the early administration on the visions and the separate visions for the United States. Hamilton proposes the idea of establishing a national bank. This is a big part of his vision, his economic vision. And as the Secretary of Treasury, it is his job to have an economic vision for the country. So he believes that a national bank will very much spur economic growth within the U.S. government and the U.S. as a whole. There's a lot of debate about this because the Constitution doesn't say anything about a national bank. There's nothing mentioned about setting up a bank. Jefferson is a strict constructionist. That term means that Jefferson has a very strict interpretation of the Constitution. If something is not mentioned in the Constitution verbatim, then it is then unconstitutional. So you really can't do anything or give the government any powers that the Constitution does not give the government itself. So because of that, Jefferson stands against the national bank because it's not mentioned. But Hamilton is what we would consider a loose constructionist. If the Constitution doesn't specifically forbid something, then why shouldn't it be allowed, is his viewpoint. After much debate, Congress and Washington do side with Hamilton on the matter, and the national bank is approved with a 20-year charter. Okay. We are going to go over one more aspect of notes, and then we'll stop for this screencast. Okay, we're going to just introduce the French Revolution and how this causes conflict, not only in Europe but within the United States. So, a little bit of French Revolution background if you're familiar with like Les Mis, the musical. This is the era in which we are kind of focusing on right now. Within the French Revolution, the French overthrew the monarchy in France. They actually behead publicly the king and queen, and they establish a republic led by one Napoleon Bonaparte. This idea, of like the people rising up, overthrowing the monarchs, executing them in public, is not very popular within the other European countries that also have monarchies, such as Great Britain and Spain. They obviously might fear that their own citizens and constituents would get their own ideas about what is acceptable and how it is acceptable to treat your monarchs. So this will basically lead to an alliance of other nations against Napoleon, and Europe is thrown into war. So you have, basically England and Spain on a team, and other, the Netherlands on a team, against Napoleon and his kind of revolutionary forces because they disapprove of the method in which they achieved power. The U.S. really has nothing to do with this. We are not in Europe. We do not have a monarchy. Washington is known to really want to maintain neutrality. He does not want the U.S. to get involved in foreign affairs, especially when we've just become independent and fought and won a war ourselves, So he wants to declare that we are neutral. In order to maintain neutrality, we will continue trading with both Britain and France equally. Like, the whole premise is we're not taking a side, so we're going to continue doing business with all countries in Europe. Well, eventually, the British will start attacking American ships that were headed to France, and they will kidnap and steal, I should say. They will steal American cargo that was headed to France. The mentality there is that these resources would help, England's adversaries. If these goods made it to France, that's helping their enemy. So they don't want these goods to go to France. But then the other thing is England also starts impressing American sailors. Impressing is not saying they are trying to woo the sailors, although impressing is spelled the same. Impressment in naval terms means they are basically kidnapping, these American sailors, these American merchants, and forcing them to serve in the British Navy. So you have kind of this like hostage situation and this like thievery, happening with England attacking U.S. ships. So Washington wants to avoid war, so he will send John Jay to England to negotiate a treaty with the English, and we will discuss the really just awfulness that is the Jay's treaty, and the lack of efficiency that treaty is when we come back on Monday. So please write down any questions you have, and we will pick up with notes then. I hope you all have a great day.